Hello everybody. Tulpa is a term used in the old Buddhism describing entities, beings which were created in somebody's imagination as a mental picture initially, but later on started living their own lives independently from their original creators. And this was a very practical daily magic approach. The monks, the practitioners, centuries ago, we know mostly about tulpas from the Tibetan Buddhism just because the Tibetan Buddhism remained isolated. Otherwise, I believe such things were common all over the world, just because of the isolation. The information from Tibet is not that much erased as it is from other parts of the world. So these monks and yogis who could create such beings, they would use them for very practical purposes, like to carry out tasks in faraway places, or to be present at few places simultaneously, like for example to manage the progress of a couple of disciples who would happen to live quite far away. And that was a bit of a barrier for the ignorant only. A couple of centuries ago, it was not practical to travel by foot to visit all your disciples and to monitor them. So the guru, for example, would do that via the medium of tulpas. He would send his astral expansions to interact with his disciples at faraway places, or scare invaders, or anything else, all kinds of practical purposes, because the tulpas, the beings, they would do pretty much anything you and me could do. Except having a gross body. That I don't know if they did, but usually the stories that we hear about nowadays are of astral tulpas. There are some attempts to philosophize over the tulpas from a modern point of view. Some of the people who try to do that try to be rational. I mean, that's the way they describe it. And the more rational and scientific they try to be, usually the more what they philosophize is disconnected from reality. Not in all cases, definitely not, but in many, or probably even most. It will actually take the reader even further away from understanding the truth about tulpas, because the people who try to decipher them from the point of view of the commonly accepted modern reference system, they always come from the point of view that imaginary means unreal. This is taken as an axiomatic rule by those who talk about the tulpas, even unconsciously, without thinking. Their intent is not to mislead people, and it's also taken as indisputable truth by the readers, because this is one of these things with which the psyche of the modern man has been polluted, infected, in order to bring us to a lower type of human species. That is done with the help of a degrading belief system, which we were led to embrace by our own will. Nobody forces us to believe in these things. The reality is that all thoughts have their fully material representation, as covered in previous videos, and what we call astral also has its fully tangible material representation. But because of the type of society in which we live, this is it's useful to believe in this in general, but it is better to experience it. That's why I'm not gonna convince you about this in this video, but instead of that, I'm gonna review the concept of the tulpas in various cultures and paradigms around the world, and then the answer of the original question, is God a tulpa, will become self-evident. First of all, let's see what is the position, the status of the tulpas in terms of the Vedic Dharma. In the vast ocean of literature called the Vedas, there are countless descriptions of Siddha, advanced yogis in the past, doing all these amazing feats and miracles, which in Buddhism are described as making tulpas. I don't know if the term even exists in the Vedic context. If it does, certainly it is not widely used, but the phenomena is the same. With the only difference that such stories are told only for the yogis of the much older times. And that is for the reasons I mentioned in the beginning of this video, that the Vedic culture was targeted and erased, not completely, but degraded by outside forces earlier than that happened in Tibet. However, the Vedas, the writings remained. Yes, it seems in somewhat edited form because of the enforced language reforms, but they are there. And what is very interesting is the description of how this thing with the various gods functions. Now, first of all, let's clear this kind of misunderstanding about polytheistic and monotheistic religions. For example, Islam is considered to be a monotheistic religion because they believe in only one God, and this is quite important. So far so good, it seems to correspond to reality, but actually if we go into the detail and see the lifestyle of the Muslim people and what their shamans and mullahs do, we will see that the mullah, to do his magic tasks, because there is a lot of practical magic still going on in the Muslim society, he calls upon those very same entities which are called gods in Hinduism. In India, Muslims and Hindus live next door, and sometimes there are even, so to say, Muslim mantras for the Hindu gods, well, calling them with Muslim names, of course, and not as gods, but using the same entities to do practical magic, and it works. Calling the same thing with different names will not change its essence, and the entire classification of monotheistic and polytheistic religions is just an illusion, a false label manufactured by the modern man to confuse its species even more. Yes, there is such a thing as maybe some people would call it supreme God. I will call it all that is. And that is indeed very, very big. I mean the biggest. That is the entire consciousness, the entity, the original in which everything resides without an exception. And that is only one, both in Islam and Hinduism, because we are using them now as an example, because usually these are the two religions which will be like symbolic of monotheistic and polytheistic religion for most people. I'm just showing you that they are actually the same, and the classification is unneeded and should be removed from our belief system if we wish to at least start going in the direction of understanding the so-called God better. Now, getting straight back to the topic of tulpas in Hinduism, all these, what most people would call gods like Lakshmi, the goddess of fortune, Shiva, Ganesh, the lord of auspicious beginnings. Most of them, or I should say mostly, later on I will return to this detail why I do not say all, but in general, let's say, The way they thrive is they depend on the faith of the people and the sacrifices of the people. That can be material sacrifices, like offering havan, means throwing purified ghee or other ingredients in the fire, or mantra chanting, meditation, giving attention, prayers. At the end, it all boils down to the same thing: the attention of the people and their devotion. It is not uncommon that these deities will manifest before their devotees and even have conversation with them. And this does happen in India, and it is very common that they will make it clear again and again that the actual things that you throw in the fire, or the material objects that you have offered to my image, murti, what you worship in the temple, that is not needed. What I actually appreciated from what you did for me, this is what the gods say to their devotees when they appear, was your devotion, endeavor, and dedication, and the attention which you gave in the mantra chanting. Yeah? To repeat the mantras mechanically is something completely different from reciting them with devotion. So this is a common knowledge that these deities, and they themselves say that we will perish, we will vanish without your attention. This is what we thrive on. This is our food. If we do not get this energy from you, we cannot give you these blessings, because these deities, they are etheric, but when they give blessings, people literally get what they want. For example, they can become millionaires after successfully worshipping Lakshmi. These are actual things that happen. It's not some imaginary realm. Or, for example, when somebody successfully completes sadhana, let's call it a magic ritual for protection, the enemy, if he's an evil person, he will not be able to harm the innocent person. First of all, when he plans something, he will start losing concentration, he will become sleepy. He will lose whatever the papers or something keys that he needs to do the harmful action. If he is very persistent and he, let's say, goes somewhere to harm this person, he may have accident on the road, or the road might be closed, or something. Always something like this will happen. So who is managing all this? Well, these are the deities, the tulpas, which have become so strong just because of the devotion, the psychic energy of the millions who have been worshipping them over the centuries and possibly even thousands of years. Because the Vedic gods, they were not freshly imagined by the Hindu people a couple of centuries ago, as Wikipedia wants to assure us. But these gods, they were already brought to the inhabitants of those areas by the rishis, the sages who founded the Vedic Dharma religion in that region. They did go significant transformation, because the society changed and the people changed beyond the imagination since those times, but many of the elements remained. Anyhow, freshly created by the Hindus or not, at some point they must have been freshly created somewhere, or maybe not. Well, it is not as easy as most people would like it to be, because many of these deities were originally fairy tales created by the people to describe actual beings which were simply residents of realms and spheres or planes of existence of which we don't have direct experience, so it is unknown, mystical for us. And no matter how intelligent were the first people, because there were human species who were much more advanced than us, maybe they were better also in describing and understanding the nature of the beings about which they are creating fairy tales. But what would be the use of that for us is not much, because when the fairy tales reached our forefathers, which were also the downgraded species to which we belong, still they were so simplified that they got further and further away from the truth. Actually, our understanding is so limited that at this point, for us, we are so blind that it is almost irrelevant if a given deity was freshly imagined for the first time in somebody's psyche, and later on it was fed with psychic energy by millions to acquire its immense powers to bestow blessings, or that being existed in its own realm or planet as what some people would describe as alien or some astral or parallel worlds, all kinds of these things. What I mean is, how would we even dare to describe almighty gods as Shiva and claim that our stories will have some validity when we cannot understand properly the actual mechanism and the way even much more simple things happen, simple relative to the nature of Shiva, like, for example, a saint dies and miracles continue to occur at his shrine, and over the time that place becomes famous. It is further fed with the devotion of the pilgrims, and he is eventually elevated to the status of god, or at least what most people would define as god. You have to understand that talking about these matters is extremely difficult, because people have completely different definitions of what God is. For example, some Christian people get very disturbed if somebody else uses the word gods for all these deities and the spirits of the saints. I apologize to such people, but I hope that even they will appreciate my video just when I use the term gods in that sense. Please replace it with whatever you feel comfortable with, because I hope everybody will agree with me that at least the supreme God is all that is, like the very, very supreme God. And I mean, what do we know about all that is? We barely know what is around. We are very far away from knowing even 1% of all that is. So I think such discrepancies with the vocabulary usage should not be a reason for anger, because when anger is there, one's discrimination is blurred, and one loses concentration because of anger and cannot obtain wisdom. So back to the Hindu deities, goddesses and gods. This process of feeding on the astral devotion of the people and then giving it back in the form of blessings, this is not some esoteric interpretation I have heard somewhere and decided it's cool. This is a major point accepted basically by all Hindus. This is how things work. It is not something mentioned somewhere and translation can be dodgy. This is something which is underlined again and again. This is like the ABC of how the world functions according to the Vedic paradigm. Okay, so we covered the ABC of that process, and there is a lot more in this tantric sadhanas. It's really a very vast ocean of knowledge, but I would also I want to select only one interesting point. Just by the way, Tantra in Hinduism is not in any way related to sex in particular, as it is in the consciousness of most modern people. The sex-related branch is just one out of the many. It is not in any way the main one. So in India, Tantra, in English, the more correct translation is actually magic. However, it is very rarely translated in this way. When people attempt to give a better translation, they would say religious rituals to make it sound better because of the negativity with which the term magic has been decorated by the TV religion. First of all, over the centuries, they made the people associate this term mainly with black magic so that they would scare them away from the white magic, which is the right way to live. But it worked successfully. First of all, they convinced people that stay away, it's dangerous, magic means black magic. And subsequently, with the use of TV, they started convincing people that it doesn't even exist. It is all in your imagination, although it is a perfectly functional thing. It's still, it is practiced, I mean, white magic in terms of healing and what is usually translated as spiritual ascent. This is white magic that functions very well, and there are plenty of proofs in the countries where it is still practiced, however, that is ignored. And people would rather believe the TV than what they actually see. And that's why more and more people are getting convinced that it doesn't even exist. Another mistaken myth about magic is that it will work and affect only those who believe in it. This belief is a subdivision of the belief that when people imagine something, it does not have any tangible existence outside the head of and the psyche of the person who imagines it, which is, of course, not true. If one doesn't subscribe to the entire paradigm of magic, white or black or anything like that, that will give some protection from it, just because one feels that one is outside that world and will not feed any energies which come from that paradigm, will not amplify them with his own thought forms, but this in no way will give him immunity. Now, before going to the tulpas of the Amazon jungle, a few short sentences about this entire concept in terms of the magical practices in Europe. In that tradition, for example, there are magical symbols which have powers in them. Powers which are capable of causing events, things which are outside the scope of somebody's imagination. It is very interesting how in the European tradition it is described these symbols have obtained their power. They were originally created, imagined, just some shaman. There is a procedure of how to make such magic signs, and then he would do penance, austerities, and rituals to draw power to these symbols, which at the end boils down to the same thing: putting psychic powers behind these signs. So before these rituals, these signs, they were simply artistic work. Somebody just wrote down a few runes or something and it looked nice. But after the ritual, other people can benefit and get things, practical things done with the power of these signs. So we see that the cultures can be different and the ritual may differ and the names of the energies or the entities might be different, but the essence remains absolutely the same. I'm not aware of any procedures for creating tulpas and having them run errands, practical errands in the world in the current Western magical practices, the modern ones. But probably the reason is that I'm not into this paradigm, I'm not in these circles. I think there are still lineages which might be keeping even this tradition alive. Like, for example, I know a family, they are very advanced, they're into white magic completely. They're following some sort of European alchemic tradition. Their holy books are European and are only a couple of 100 years old. And this thing with the total secrecies is again applicable cross paradigm in all magical lineages currently on Earth. Even if you go to the Amazon forest, the shamans will look very friendly and immediately they will tell you, yes, I have acquired the city, the perfection of this and this plant spirit. But this will be things which anyway anybody can find out easily. When it comes to really deep stuff, absolute silence. And the reason for this secrecy is usually not that they don't want the general people to benefit with this high knowledge, but because now in Kali Yuga, the age of degradation, many people, if they find out how they can influence everything around them with magic, they will start dispensing justice, become judges and start punishing people in the name of making the world a better place with good intention, but without being aware that their idea of what good and bad is not the absolutely universal standard, but is something that has been implanted in them, usually by the mass media or otherwise by the family they grew up with. And all these sources are nowadays sadly not sources which will teach you the angelic standard of goodness. However, on the other hand, I also see some sort of tendency of this secrecy to somehow diminish over the years. And the reason is that less and less people understand what is the use of these rituals anyway, so they don't have interest to start with. And on the other hand, even those which show some interest, their ability to concentrate long enough to pronounce mantras, spells, and to complete a ritual in a meaningful way, this ability diminishes just because people know less and less. The educational standards are dropping very fast in many regions of the world, not all, but in many. And also the processed food doesn't nourish our intelligence, and also these electromagnetic frequencies emitted by the modern devices like Wi-Fi, etc., they temper considerably with our mental performance, which could be anyway severely damaged by addictions like alcohol or caffeine. So earlier I was trying to bring up the topic of particle of certain deities, gods or goddesses, descending into certain people. I think I got carried away by something else when I was trying to talk about that. But anyhow, what is more interesting and I think very important is that the process is there both in the Indian tantric tradition and in the Amazon forest, and is very, very similar. So people worship deities with a certain desire in mind. The desire can be very pure, like knowledge or even attaining liberation, whatever that means, because that is also a very elastic term. But there is always some sort of expectation or suggested reward for the worship they do. And if the ritual is done properly and the desired result is not absolutely impossible, like becoming king of all universes, I mean, it is possible, but somehow it's not very practical. If the desire is kind of practical for earthly scale and the ritual is done properly, usually the deities will respond, even though now it is Kali Yuga, dark times. Usually people will not hear direct words as an answer, but within, let's say, 3 months, whatever one has done ritual properly for and with the proper intensity, they do get the boon, they do get the reward, their wish is fulfilled, even if it is very difficult. But that is kind of the procedure for the layman. For the shamans, there are other procedures. Like there is a way to call a spark of a given deity to permanently reside within your body. That doesn't necessarily mean that the given deity will become your permanent servant and you can just give orders. It involves much more. When this particle lands, it also changes the mindset of the carrier of the particle. For example, if one carries a particle of Lakshmi, if one has done the ritual properly, when the particle descends, the person will all of a sudden, even if he doesn't know about this, some people have done this worship and they actually report they didn't know about this, side effect. They did the worship just for fulfilling a given wish. All of a sudden their mindset starts changing and they find themselves very much interested in decorating and cleaning their house, starting flower garden. They become interested in exotic plants, exotic animals, art, music, all these things which were not so important for them in the past, all of a sudden they become priority for them. And that's because the nature of Lakshmi, who has descended into their body, is changing their very being and ways of life. In India, currently, the procedure, the sadhana, is usually done with mantras. They have to be chanted, which is different from repeating them like a parrot, with a very particular mindset. Often there are very complicated rituals involved, which Western people can never ever do. Actually, we can't even properly pronounce most of the mantras. In the past, there were more yogis. The yogis would do it through meditation, just with concentration and pranayama. They would obtain the siddhis automatically. Siddhi means these mystic powers. They would scarcely use mantras. Now there are very few yogis left in India. This path is getting lost. In the much, much older times, like there are older Vedas, the first generation Vedas, which according to Seth, as channeled by Jane Roberts, were written at the dawn of written language, because earlier than that people did not need to write. They would memorize everything just by hearing it once. But when their mental abilities started declining, the need of written language appeared. And Seth uses this type of description. He says the early Vedas consist of blurry memories of the earlier times when people would handle the forces of nature in a very direct manner. For example, a mother would leave her baby below a tree and go hunting or gathering fruits, and then she would merge her spirit with the tree to monitor and look at her baby from a distance while she is gathering fruits. Actually, when people were our race, when we were still really expert in handling those energies, there was no need of even spoken language. Spoken language appeared when we started getting divorced from that union with nature. We took the path of creating an artificial world around us. And with the help of language and the definitions which we gave to different words and ideas, we managed successfully to disconnect ourselves from this primeval knowledge which was built into our species to control the elements with our psyche, to communicate with each other through telepathy, and to be the masters of our natural environment in the most direct way. There were also mantras back then in the beginning, in the early Vedic times or pre-Vedic times, but those mantras would work just by uttering them once, while now in the rituals, to even activate the mantra to start with, one has to do what is technically called mantra utkillan, which in practical terms usually means spending many days in chanting to even activate the mantra. So this descent of a spark of a given deity is usually done through a ritual or penance which would last on average, let's say, a couple of weeks. In some cases it is months, during which one has to follow usually very strict restrictions. In India they call it sadhana, in the Amazon jungle they call it dieta. I don't know what is the traditional word. Well, every tribe will have its own word anyway, but the modern one, which everybody will understand, is the Spanish word dieta, which describes only one of the aspects, and that is the food restriction, which is definitely not the most important from the full process, which is very similar on both sides of the ocean. Solitude and isolating oneself from the usual paradigm of the modern world is absolutely essential. Although the diet is somewhat different, like in India, of course, a vegetarian diet and things only which you have cooked yourself are a must for most sadhanas. In Peru, actually, the proper diet, the traditional one I'm talking about, is whatever you can find around. And if you can catch some fish or something with your own hands, you can eat that as well. Things like onion and garlic are absolutely prohibited in both traditional diets. Now, eating only things with the natural patterns of the world as created by the gods, that is common for all practices and isolation from the world. Now, how exactly you make the contact with the spirit of the deity which you want to descend in your body can be somewhat different. Like in India, in the Patanjali Yoga Sutras, different methods are mentioned, and one of them is using oshadi or magic plants. Although this is not widely practiced still in India, this path was there. So it kind of, the ayahuasca tradition is contained within the Vedic knowledge. Now in the Amazon, I'm not aware of them using any particular mantras as such. Although the Icarus, these shamanic chants, are somewhat like the Indian Sabri mantras, something like that. They lack this precision of the Indian mantra chanting, because precision in anything and in the Amazon tribes is just not something that exists as like a general idea over there. But still, people get the spirits of various plants, like nature spirits, to descend in them, and the experience which they get is absolutely identical to what the practitioners in India get. It boosts what we call intuition. It is a very broad term, but also again with the plant spirits, when one does the dieta of a particular plant, it kind of changes the nature of the person, because then you have the stamp of this spirit forever, or at least until the end of your life. I'm not aware if these stamps with the plant spirits are carried life after life. I guess it depends on how strong they are, but in Hinduism, and also from the practical experience of people who have done such things in this and previous lives, and have the actual vision to see what is going on, and this is also written in the Vedic books, when the sadhanas, the tapasyas, the penances which were done are quite strong, they are most definitely transferred and valid for a number of lives. That is one of the possible reasons for which people can be born with special abilities, because they might have done this type of ritual. Although it may not always look like a ritual to the modern man if it was done in the yogic context, but he has done it in one form or another in some other lifetime. Could be other reasons as well, like, for example, where does the given soul come from? If it is a young soul, then yes, this is something which it has to achieve in some form or another in some life. But sometimes, also some souls, not all souls are made of the same dough. Also, some souls come from other spheres of existence. Like some people, you see them as walking people, but inside they're half animal, means their soul is connected. Connected means has had a lot of evolutional work done in another species, and then they decide to experiment how does it feel to live as a human. And especially in their like initial life, they will look like a human, but inside their spirit will be very much functioning on the level from the animal species from which they come. We should also not forget that some animal races are far more advanced than the modern humans. So a soul might be new to earthly experiences, but it may get born with lots of siddhi or mystic powers just because of the species from which it comes is naturally endowed with those powers. And not only animal species, also human-like species or species which we don't have anything even to compare with. When a soul comes and lands on earth from such background, it may get born naturally with siddhis without doing any sadhana connected with any earthly religion or a magic practice. So I'm trying not to get carried away from the topic of the actual magic rituals of obtaining such particles to accompany your soul. And it's quite interesting that both in the Indian, in the Vedic magical and tantric practices, because over there is tantric path and Vedic path in India. And in the Amazon jungle, during these times of penance, whatever it's usually weeks or a couple of months, sex is also completely prohibited. And the reason for that is not because sex is bad. It is not neither according to the Vedic religion nor according to the worldview of the people in the Amazon jungle. No, it is something very nice. However, when you work with Kundalini, it's a simple, how to say, when you do electric installation, you don't have live electricity at the time you're working. And since during bodily unions, this Kundalini, it is very active, people are not allowed to do it when they do other mystic practices, so that the wiring doesn't make a circuit and people don't get electrocuted by their own Kundalini. Another reason for which sex is prohibited in almost all tradition or all traditions during this type of magic practices is that the right of experiencing such divine Kundalini things is one of the most precious things we have as humans. And by taking the vow of celibacy for a given period, even if it is a week or a couple of months, the person who makes that vow uses this right that he has as a currency to exchange it for something else. One of the reasons for which many Western-born people are practically unfit for this type of rituals is that they don't understand how vows work. They may hear from somewhere or be part of a group and take some sort of vow and then not do what they have promised. Because who cares? They think you said something. Does it matter you do it or not? It is just symbolic or something like that. Well, it is not. Even in legal sense, according to our secular law now on earth, if you give something to somebody as a gift or for other reason, that already belongs to the other person by the power of the verbal contract which you had with him. If you out of carelessness just get it back without permission, you will be practically stealing it. So in the same way, people may make vows in front of various gods or goddesses and then don't follow them, not understanding the power of the verbal contracts with the divinities, and then get into trouble for taking something which does without permission, which does not anymore belong to them, or simply not fulfilling what they have promised. And now just a few words about the divinities or the plant spirits worshipped in the context of ayahuasca and the herbal plant medicine of the Amazon jungle. So there are countless such spirits. Every plant species has a master spirit as such, and then each and every individual plant, according to in what environment is growing, has its own plant spirit as well. Now, the master spirits, they also have humanoid forms. For example, and it will be like fixed. The shamans know this one will be like with blue complexion and long hair, and the other plant spirit would be with green skin color or white or red, things like this. They would have like fixed features, and I think that this is one of the symptoms. One of the signs to read and understand that most likely these are also tulpa formations, because the plant spirits do not have any biological necessity of human-like bodies. I think they must have been created to facilitate their communication with the dominant species on our earth, which is the human race. Because for many people, when they see a humanoid form, human-like form, immediately they would associate it with a person and consciousness in which they can communicate without wondering much how exactly to do it. Now, there are type of people who say, oh no, all these things, getting united with goddesses and stuff, this is not for me. I am gonna develop my own powers. I'm gonna become god and goddess of my own. And this is also one way to go, a good way to go. But just because the given practitioner has adopted this type of philosophy when it's expressed in words at this particular moment of his evolution, this doesn't deprive him of the richness the riches which one can acquire. I mean, like mystic and spiritual riches by uniting one's soul with the divinities. And in such case, when one doesn't deliberately seek them, when one comes to the purity, to the corresponding required level of purity, these deities, they would come by themselves and establish kind of a friendly relationship with the given practitioner. That is also the yogic way to do it. Yogis, they are usually advised not to pay attention to the mystic powers. They are just small stations along the way, but still in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali there is a mention, and at this level you acquire this and that siddhi automatically. There is a very famous verse in Bhagavad Gita, the most important book of all Hindus, which says that the Lord himself speaks in that verse that in whatever form you worship me, in that form I will appear to you. And this is exactly what happens, for example, when people who have near-death experiences and have seen angels or deities on the other side. Usually they're the way they would expect them to be. Yeah, if they belong to some religion while they were alive, they would usually see the deities and angels of that religion. Or even without dying, many people, religious or not, do have visions, and the deities or angels, whatever protective spirits, appear in a form, exactly in the form in which the given person would expect them to be according to his cultural background. Or in India, where many people do sadhanas, it is a very common practice to have an image, like some sort of painting in a frame, to worship during your ritual. And not surprisingly at all, because many people do get actually visions of the deities which they are worshipping, which talk to them and do things. It's not just the imagination, yeah, it's not some sort of only a vision which can be attributed, according to some people, to pure imagination. No, they say this and this and it happens. So apparently there is something more than what many people would call hallucination. But the deities who do that, they would usually look exactly as the photo which the given person has been worshipping during the ritual, and that photo is the imagination of some artist, actually. So many modern people who consider themselves rational and scientific, when they hear about that, it will only feed their suspicion or belief that all these are hallucinations, all these visions. While in reality, and these are not at all sick hallucinations, But our human consciousness, although we do not understand how it works, but it is so powerful that even the gods depend on it, and it shapes the very form of the gods. It is not that they are obliged to appear in such a form, but they choose to do it by themselves just because these are the rules of the game. Like this, the communication is going on properly. You worship Shiva, and the form of the Shiva as expected appears. If some sort of fox appears, it would be confusing. So in my early days, I was Hindu, basically. But later on, with ayahuasca, and mainly with the wisdom as channeled by Jane Roberts from Set, I understood that Hinduism is only a tool. It is a good tool, though. And one way to measure and to find out if your path is really a tool or a waste of time is that when you try to do things in another path, you don't have to start from the very beginning. For example, if a Hindu, a tantric, or Amazon shaman, if their vision is fully developed, when you stand in front of them, they will see if you have, for example, deities, sparks of certain deities, even if you have done that procedure of obtaining outside the method which he's teaching. I mean, some people can have them even by birth without any method, but they will be able to use these siddhis even if that is their first ayahuasca ceremonies. If they're a very advanced soul, they may do more than the shaman who has 30 years of experience with ayahuasca, just because, for example, they may have obtained the siddhis of 3 or 4 deities with Vedic practices, and the vice versa. For example, when I was in Peru, because I stayed there a long time, I offered a service on the internet, like free help. I wanted to see how is it to work with people. So I offered this type of free service to facilitate, when somebody comes from the West, I would help them and sit with shamans during ceremonies and help them to connect to the right shamans for personal work, for those who don't wish, who cannot spend a lot because ayahuasca retreats are very expensive, and those who wish to work in a small circle, just with a couple of people sitting and not big ceremonies with 20, 30 people. And some people came. They took advantage of this offer. And one of them was a Muslim woman who lives in UK. So before meeting this woman, my understanding of Islam was quite limited. I mean, I was born near the Turkish border, so I knew those people do lots of magic, but I didn't know any details as such because I was never in touch with the Muslim community. But this woman, she blew my brains open. She was a very polite and nice lady, and she came, and just by looking at me, she told me, I see your powers, I see everything about you. And she also said, like quietly in between other things that you cannot see now, but when we sit in ceremony, you will start seeing my powers. You cannot see them yet because she was talking to me, because you don't have yet that vision. At the end, you will also benefit from my powers. I didn't pay much attention to that because she was just talking quietly, and she slipped that in between many other unimportant things, and I kind of even forgot it until the ceremonies did not start. Well, it happened exactly as she told me. This lady has managed to develop amazing magic powers. I mean, I did not inquire into the actual rituals that they are doing, but in overall, my impression is that they work with some sort of very strong powers. And later on, it came to my mind that when I grew up, there was a general idea that Muslim magic is very strong, like the strongest people, local village people know about, kind of stronger than what people in Europe would do. It was just something, a popular belief. And then from the times which I lived in India, I also remember things that which I was not paying attention to, that always, because over there people talk a lot about magic, is when it comes to Muslim magic, it would be, oh, that's really strong. So the lesson which I learned from the experience with the Muslim lady was that although she jumped in a completely different world of the Amazon forest, she was not a beginner there from the very start. She was already on advanced level. She could see a lot of what was going on magical level during ayahuasca ceremony, probably much more than me even, I suppose. Although I've been there like for a long time and I was kind of integrated into that paradigm, I would know much more details about the actual ritual or what the shaman was supposed to do. But probably I was seeing less than her. But because her powers were real and not imaginary, and because she was walking a real path, she could go to a ritual in a language, in a culture of which she's got no idea at all, and she would feel at home and she would understand everything that is going on. So when I was making long ago the ayahuasca videos, there was so many questions all the time I was receiving. Is there any course? I want to become an ayahuasca shaman. I want to start learning from the very beginning. What is the process? The real answer is that currently there is no such way as people wanted to start from ABC and to advance in a way that they will be more or less sure that they will learn what they want, like the proper way. If you go to school and you do your homework properly, at the end you are most likely to be able to read and write. Yeah? So they think that there should be some sort of school like this where Western people could learn this art. But the reality is that there isn't. And the Western-born people who have managed to learn did so just because they came already advanced from another paradigm and started already at a high level. For example, in the Ayahuasca Association, Carlos Tanner, who is running 2 months shaman courses, even he says the same thing. 2 months is very short. There is no guarantee that everybody will graduate. We do not recommend to all the graduates to hold ceremonies. At the end, we tell them what is our recommendation. Are you ready or not? And he says the main thing is not what you do during the course. The main factor is who were you before you started the course. Of course, with time in the future, when people figure out again that they do need mystic practices to understand who they are, to understand their own soul, their own being, of course, when that happens, the magic schools will be back. Of course, I'm telling that from the point of view for a Western person, for they are still traditional magic schools which are fully functional. Not so many, but they are in Asia, in all tribal societies. But we are unfit for them. Now, before discovering ayahuasca, I was more or less, for all practical purposes, a Hindu. That was the lens through which I would view the world. But with ayahuasca, I understood that actually Hinduism is also, to some extent, a fairy tale. I did not lose faith in the underlying basic principles because I saw that they are valid and functional even in other paradigms. But in a sense, I felt a bit on shifting sands because I lost faith in a lot of the details of the rituals, for example. From Hinduism, which before that for me were like solid and indisputable way, the way. So when I found that they are not the way, but they are a way, I started like asking myself, but what about the really this underlying reality which is same everywhere? I wanted to know more about that, and especially about the nature of the gods like Bhrama, Vishnu and Shiva, which are supposed to be like universal and not something which some monk imagined and later on the village people fed with their psychic powers and it turned into God. Brahma, Vishnu and Shiva, they are supposed to be like the underlying energy from which the monk and the rest of the universe were made. So I was really starting to inquire like how can I really understand and perceive these things, not just reading something and believing it. That is a different thing. I wanted to be sure because I want to know the truth. Now I'm gonna share with you my personal observation about the real nature of the gods. These are things I've seen myself in meditation, in ayahuasca. This is knowledge which I dug out myself. It's not that I read it somewhere and decided to check it out and confirm it. It is something which I found out when I approached the question with open mind and without an answer which I'm trying to confirm. Now, as far as Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, this famous trinity, the most important underlying gods in Hinduism, which in very loose terms could respond maybe to the Holy Spirit in Christianity or Allah, something like this. I don't claim that is a precise definition, but that type of high order of God, such thing exists. It is not. It existed even before the people who created Tulpas about it. And we know about this trinity because of very wise souls, the rishis who initially founded the Vedic tradition, the original primeval Vedic tradition, of which the what we now know as Vedic is only a pale reflection, a remodification of remodifications. However, as far as the actual forms, now if you look about information, what is the form of Brahma, you will see an anthropomorphic being with 4 heads riding a swan. Now that form, that particular form, could be a tulpa which was reinforced over the centuries with the thought forms of many people and became real. However, is the real Brahma in his loka, which means abode, really having anthropomorphic form? I doubt. I would say most probably not. Also, I've been trying to call various divinities during ayahuasca ceremonies when my vision was open to see how they look like after all. And I was calling for their true original form. And I never saw an anthropomorphic form. Yes, I most definitely saw the colors which are associated with these deities without fail. Shiva, most definitely this dark, rich blue, very heavy. It is also possible that because of some blockage, they did not show me their anthropomorphic forms, because those are very powerful and it's not easy to see them. Basically, throughout the ages, the different civilizations created their own tulpas of this supreme, all that is God. And when they were making these tulpas, by definition, it's not just that you give some sort of image how the god looks like, you also modify its character. For example, initially the people, their spirit was fully connected with the environment, with nature. People back then did not need protection from the elements because they were directly in touch. There was two-way communication with the clouds, with the rain, with the wind. When the people started losing that connection, they felt the need of protector gods, and or a protector god as a main god. And that's how the god behaved as well, because don't forget, the tulpas, they have a life of their own. It's not just some sort of hallucinatory hologram hanging in the clouds. So tulpas are something a term which is used in the old Buddhism, but not in the modern Buddhism. So many millions of people, for example, in modern America, identify themselves as Buddhists, but in the retreats and on the websites which they use, they don't do exercises for making entities which can perform tasks on the other side of the world. Why is that? Well, we have a lot to learn from this situation, because this modern Buddhism, it was made very recently by Dalai Lama to replace the old one, and it is almost like a new religion, although it has the same name, because the Tibetan civilization was almost completely destroyed by the Chinese. Dalai Lama, being really a topmost genius, he created something new out of the from the ashes of the old one, something which will appeal to the limited modern people, something that they can relate to and will also give them some benefits. The benefits they get cannot compare with what the Buddhists a few hundred years ago could accomplish in Tibet, when flying yogis were still seen in the skies by the people sometimes. But still, it is something. It is good that he did that. It is a good thing that he created this new religion. He is not to be blamed. Because if you have a crippled, almost paralyzed person, he can barely walk. If you go to him and start preaching, I'm gonna make you like a marathon runner, you will win like Olympic medals for running, he's not gonna pay attention to you, he's not gonna follow you. But if you suggest to this person a path following which he can become healthy using meditation, that is something he can relate to, something he will try, and something he will be content with in his life. Sometimes Western people who consider themselves Buddhists, if they really travel in the rural, unspoiled by civilization areas in Asia where an old form of Buddhism is still practiced, these people are kind of shocked. It's not what they expect. After that they share their experiences and they say, but they're not really Buddhists. It is that much of striking difference between the modern Buddhism practiced in the West and the traditional Buddhism, which the modern Buddhists, when they encounter in real life, actually describe as some sort of culture which worships spirits and saints, unknown to them saints, and too many unknown dragons and things like that. And not only worshipping, but also talking to them directly. In a book called Red Shambhala, one can find really recent historic documents illustrating how this new Buddhist religion was created. Actually, some Western Buddhists got very angry with the author of this book. They considered it a kind of a blasphemy to their religion to suggest that it is actually not ancient, at least in this form in which they practice. But I think they should not take it in this way. They should only seize the opportunity to maybe travel and learn more on the top of what they can achieve with the simple methods which are used in the practice of the modern Buddhism. This phenomena of building a new religion on the top of the new one just because the time and the winds of change demand it so quickly is a perfect illustration of how new the tulpas are modified by the level of the consciousness of the people through the ages. And if we can witness such a striking change in just a couple of decades, what kind of change these religions have undergone throughout the ages? And something else very important is that time is not linear. I'm not just repeating something I read and liked. This I have also experienced many times, and I'm experiencing more and more in my own practice. It's not that the future has not happened. The future is as solid as the past. And if we want to connect with tulpas from other times and other civilizations, we can. It will be somewhat easier to connect to deities which are somehow connected with the clans or the heritage of this our incarnation, or even other incarnations which we had, if we can connect first to that body which we had, because the self is like a hub. And we do have many incarnations, although they are like separate people from us. Still, if we attempt with the right mystic practice, we can be them, and we can also connect to their Kul Devata. In Hindi it's called Kul means clan. Or sometimes we may find it easier to connect with the protector gods of the given area in which we live. Even if we decide to delve into areas and rituals of completely unexplored areas with which we seem to have no connection, it is absolutely possible. But we'll have to play according to the rules of that game and follow that ritual. For example, if you decide to go the Vedic path, as a start completely, you cannot eat meat, you cannot drink any alcohol, absolutely not. And if you say, but these are external things, these are rules which would differ from place to place, this is not the absolute truth, because like the same deities, these very same Vedic deities in Tibetan context, Tibetan Buddhist context, they do not require to be vegetarian, and yet they have rituals with which you can connect to those deities while not being vegetarian. So obviously that is not a must. One can reason in such a way, but just with your reasoning, if you try to do half of the Vedic ritual, results which you would get most likely will not be according to your paradigm projected on the Vedic paradigm, but according to the Vedic paradigm itself. And especially if you do, for example, some sort of worship of those fearsome, wrathful, the angry-looking deities, that is very risky. one can get very sick or even crazy or even die, because these deities, they function in their own paradigm, and if one breaks the rules, one will get the corresponding reaction to that, which is not good. If, for example, you don't want to be vegetarian, but you want to worship the Bhairav forms, these wrathful, fierce forms, and you cannot be vegetarian, then do it through some ritual, through a culture, like, for example, the Buddhist, which does not require you to be vegetarian. Then you're not in danger if you have a proper shaman next to you who knows what he's doing, because all these forms, you should be doing anything with them only if you have a proper shaman by your side at every step. Some sort of corresponding spirits to the wrathful deities in the East are herbs like datura, just one example, in the Amazon jungle. That is very heavy, and the rule is the same. You do that only if you have the shaman who has the power of that spirit next to you. There was some Westerners, they think that they can disregard the paradigm and do it on their own. One of them died from datura just because he thought that he can do it himself. No, anywhere where you see scary deities, stay away unless you have an accomplished shaman sitting next to you. With sattvic divinities, sattvic means like Vishnu, Krishna, Lakshmi, all these fair complexion, peaceful looking deities without weapons sticking from 10 hands when you see their pictures, those are safe. You cannot get harmed by them. Even if somebody who doesn't know anything tries to worship them, the worst that can happen is that he will get no result when he does mistakes, but he will not get punishment, as long as the ritual is sattvic as well. So there should be always some sort of knowledge. So not only the deity has to be sattvic, but also the process by itself. Then one is free of fear of any punishment. These Bhairav deities, the wrathful, angry forms, they are not scary looking because they're after you and they want to harm you and they're looking for an opportunity, like evil spirits. No, they're scary and mean only to the dark sides, which you don't need anyway. But because, dark side means something which we accept as part of our own being. And once we are shown that it is not very nice, we will feel, well, extreme discomfort, to use mild terms. To use the real names will be like horror and seeing our worst fears come alive. And that's how it would feel to have a direct meeting with those deities. But it won't be their fault, because the purpose for which they exist is to expose your dark side and remove it from you, even surgically. So if you have been calling them, this is what you subscribed to start with. It will be very interesting to know about the experiences of people who have tried such things. Did they achieve anything? I think their results most likely would be very marginal, very partial. Because I know of a real case of a man from Europe. He was doing meditation and he was not at all into Hindu or India things. He just never had any connection with that. He barely knew anything about the Hindu gods. And Shiva came to him in visions and talked to him a few times. And he actually directed him to read Hindu books. One of them was the one I remember was the writings of Ramana Maharishi, of whom this person had not even heard ever before this meditation. So it is one more confirmation that he was really talking to Shiva and not to some hallucination which is valid only in his own realm of consciousness. And by the way, Shiva himself told him that Ramana Maharishi was an incarnation of his own self. So the point I'm making by telling you this story with this farmer who got visions and contact with Shiva is that these tulpas, they are not as simple as hallucinating a hologram in the clouds. They are connected with the culture which feeds them with thought forms. And when one gets connected or plans to get connected to a given tulpa, one should be prepared to get involved with that type of culture as well. Because tulpas are contextually related forms of God. Now, many people will have the feeling, but you're talking too much about tulpas. I want the real God without the hallucination of the people, these layers of coloring from other people. I want the true source. I want God in his pristine form. Well, from what I have seen in meditation, we, in our current form, don't have that capacity. That's why we need tulpas. I think the maximum we can comprehend and experience while we're in a human body is some sort of aspect of that, all that is. Some sort of symbol that gives us a clue of what lies ahead when we evolve as souls. Also, from my own experience, I can see that what, let's say, 20 years ago I would identify as the form I would achieve one day after I achieve liberation actually exists because all this time and future and past is illusion. So that form exists, even though, from my perspective, while I'm in this illusion of time, I'm still not yet there. And once, only once, I had the opportunity to experience like merging to become that person for a short while and see how the concept of God looks from that perspective, which is much, much broader than the current human thing. But even though that happened to me, now I'm back in this form, and all I have is kind of memories which are difficult to translate in human terms. Now, this entire situation with the various gods and even the chief gods of the religion, of the various religions being actually tulpas, may kind of sound somewhat disappointing to some people because they would say, I don't want people's fantasies, I want a real God. I want to know the God in his pristine form without being stained with the fantasies of cultures. However, this God, as tulpas, this is the real God. And if we have that feeling and longing for the original God, that could be a sign, not necessarily, but it could be a sign that we house beliefs which are detrimental to enjoying life and living life to the fullest, which is the actual purpose for which God expanded into us, because we are also expansions of God. The most common detrimental belief in this connection could be that imaginary forms are real. Yes, maybe some yogis have the siddhi or mystic powers to make them run errands, but for the ordinary people, they only remain as hallucinations without any substance. That is absolutely not true. And if one comes from such a point of view, the entire understanding of how the creation works will be highly mistaken, and such a person could never become the master of his environment as he was intended to be by the god of the Tulpas. As covered in many previous videos, it is not the three-dimensional world is not the real one, and the thoughts are not the hallucinations, but it is vice versa, because initially this world was imagined as a hallucination, in most people's term, by somebody, and later on it got this hard shell, which we call real. By hard shell I mean this illusion that objects have substance. They don't. They constitute of matter. Matter constitutes of all these electrons, all kinds of atoms, particles. And the more sophisticated tools we make to view what they consist of, the more we discover that it is only and purely energy, nothing solid at all. And on the top of that, those particles seem to behave consciously. Their behavior changes when the observer thinks something. Another belief which could be connected of such negation of our own powers is something which we are all groomed into it just by being born in this society, and further this underlying belief is cemented by watching TV or talking to people who watch TV, is that people are helpless, for example, in front of the nature elements, for example, natural disasters, or they are helpless in front of their governments. So many people would feel, what are you talking to me, that I have godly powers to create worlds and planets, when I cannot even create a nice house to live in, or peaceful situation in which I can thrive in my life. So one may think in this way without realizing that the actual cause of his predicament and helplessness is his belief in that helplessness. With proper knowledge of how the creation functions and how our own creative powers to create situations can be used, and with the right exercise, one can be freed of miseries. Probably in the next video I will suggest a very simple and effective meditation practice which can serve as a stepping stone for those who wish to gain their independence from the miseries and calamities of this world. And I'm bringing this topic about this helplessness, the mentality of helplessness here in the video about tulpas, because one illusion is connected to others, and in this way we stay trapped in the mesh of ignorance. And this modern fashion to spend our entire lives in fear and feeling helpless in front of corruption and governments, it affects even our understanding of God, because automatically we project that imaginary weakness to everything which we create with our psyche, that is by default powerless and having no validity outside our head. On the basis of that, now anything imagined is kind of unimportant, of less value, less real than the so-called tangible world. The concept of how the tulpas function may even sound to some people as an attempt to degrade God, to make him look somehow less in the eyes of the people. But in reality, what more than 99% of the people consider to be God is one tulpa or another. And those who those who aspire to explore the existences which are beyond the tulpas, for them it will be very useful, because before writing poetry, one should learn the alphabet and how to write. I think that this is a very important subject, and I will be very happy if you wish to re-upload this video to your YouTube channel as well. As long as you do it non-commercially, you don't need to ask me even for permission. I give it right now straight away for non-commercial use, as long as the entire video is uploaded, not just parts of it, and the watermark with my name is clearly visible. You're most welcome to add your own opinion or introduction before the video, or publish or attach something at the end. After all, it is your channel. However, the video as it is should appear without any modifications, because if something is removed, then the rest of the information may end up conveying exactly the opposite of what I'm actually saying. All the images in this video are copyright free, so there is no problem on that side as well.